Welcome everyone to the new Sonic Field. We are thrilled today to have with us as a guest, Jason Carl Rosenberg. Jason Rosenberg is currently assistant professor at Sewanee University of the South and is a composer, conductor, and music researcher. And we're excited to talk with him today about all of that stuff. And so I'm going to turn it over to Jason here. So Jason, welcome. And tell us a little bit about your trajectory since graduating from New College.
Sure, happy to, and happy to be here. After New College, I went directly to grad school. I went to UC San Diego, and I chose UC San Diego because it is one of the epicenters for contemporary experimental music, which is what I learned at New College in many ways. New Music New College, for instance, is a great avenue for being exposed to and immersed in that kind of sound world. And I was hooked, and then I was continued that interest at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign for a semester while at New College. And then I went to UC San Diego because that was the place out of any place that I visited for grad schools that most connected me with that interest. And for instance, when a performer gets a degree at UC San Diego in performance, instead of getting a DMA in music performance, they get a DMA in new music performance. New music is part of the degree. You almost never hear Chopin when you go down the music halls. You might hear, you're much more likely to hear something like Ligeti or, Stockhausen or Boulez or something than you would hear Chopin or Beethoven. And I went there from, 2001 until basically 2008 or so. And I pursued a music composition concentration and got my master's and then continued on to PhD. At the same time, I also started being a research assistant beginning in 2002 at the Neurosciences Institute. And so I began to be involved in music cognition, music perception, and music neuroscience as a secondary field of interest, and studying with Ani Patel. And so I had this kind of bifurcated path through grad school, which was mimicked at New College since I did also music and math concentration. So that was kind of early on, this music and science and music and the natural sciences and mathematics was always kind of a part of this dual trajectory. And that continued through grad school. After grad school, I decided that I wanted to be a freelance composer. And I spent the next 6 years or so living first in San Diego and teaching there on the side, but mostly trying to survive as an artist, the dream, just write music all day, putting little dots on blank paper and doing that for quite a while. And then I went first to Germany and then Austria, then to New York, then Switzerland. And then in Switzerland, after about 6 years of doing freelance, I decided that I wasn't very happy doing that. It was too lonely, it was too isolating for me. I'm too much of an extrovert, and I wanted more collaboration in my daily life. And so I decided to switch gears a little bit and go into academia and become a professor. And so that is not an easy path to take, but with a lot of work. And I ended up applying for positions and ended up taking one in Singapore at Yale NUS. So Yale and the National University of Singapore joined forces to create a college that is very much along the lines of New College in many ways. It's the same size. It's about 1,000 students, very similar in scope and very similar kind of students with their self independence and self motivation, independent thinkers with a goal to have an impact on the world and have some social change. And then from there, I went to California, where I was a composer in residence at the Center for New Music in the Bay Area. And then I took a job at Millsaps College, where I was for 3 years, which is another small liberal arts college. And then now, for the past year and a half, I've been at Swanee, which is a yet another small liberal arts college, um, and it's those are the places that I find most at home for me. And yeah, I've been really loving my existence here for the past year and a half at this new home in Tennessee.
Wow, that's amazing. You know, I was asking about trajectory, and I was just kind of trying to picture this geographically.
Mhm.
And yeah, that's quite a string of locations and different types of opportunities and work environments. And as you were mentioning, independent work versus collaborative work, working at a new music center as a composer in residence, and then academia. Um, are you finding that your work in academia is kind of hitting that collaborative uh, need that you were feeling when you were working freelance?
Yeah, it's a good question. By and large, yes. The answer would be yes. Um, One nice thing about being in a university environment is that you're surrounded by your colleagues. At least most of the places I've been, you have your office space is literally just next door to each other. You can hear each other practicing and playing, and you every single time you're in your office, there's opportunities for moment to moment interactions. But then, of course, if you are working next to each other and you're taking breaks together and chatting, you end up forming collaborations. You create projects together. You start doing things together. So that's definitely part of it. Just the daily system is like that. And then because I know that that was an important part of what I was looking for as an artist, I sought it out beyond just the immediate realm of who's next door. And I started creating more music that could be collaborative in its architecture, in its design, and that led me down a real path towards creating more collaborative projects.
So maybe that leads to our next world of questions, which is tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing right now. Like, what are you interested in now? How would you describe your current area of work and interest?
As anyone knows, the maybe one of the great biases of the professional world today is in specialization. Like you should choose a path and you stick with it and then become one of the experts in that little niche field. And that is rewarded in all kinds of ways, whether you're in a freelance world or in a academic world, professional world. Specialization is the default way to success. And I have gone against the grain and chosen the generalist path, the constant amateur, the jack of all trades. Even this whole idea, like I said before, about choosing two different paths, it, I continue to do that, and I still it makes it harder. If I just chose one of them, my life would be easy right now. And I often tell students, don't follow what I do unless you feel you absolutely can't do anything else, because it is frankly a lot harder. And just talking about my own music and what I'm doing now, like what kind of music am I creating? It's very frustrating perhaps for others to hear because I do all these different types of things, which makes it difficult to describe. So just in a nutshell, I still write music for elite ensembles whenever I have opportunities to. Some of the virtuosic performers of the world, and that is very rewarding for me because I was like pushing myself, and there are things that my imagination likes to ponder and create that I can really only have this type of ensemble um, come bring to life. But then I also love working with amateur ensembles, and I do experimental music, which is leads to this collaborative thing I was just mentioning, where it I had an ensemble called the Mississippi Experimental Music Ensemble, or MEME, and all of our pieces, it was kind of like a collective. We had a number of performers, and we would create pieces together. Someone would often bring in a piece, and then we'd workshop it together and try out different things, and eventually we would bring it together. And Steve Miles would do something like this in his experimental music classes. Um, and so this was a way of collaboratively generating and developing music. And that has been a large part of my output in the past number of years, and something I'm still, even though I don't run that ensemble anymore, I am still involved in those types of creative activities. And then I also do a lot of music for science experiments, and creating music that can be used in experimental design to test how music and the brain interact. And so it's a lot of different types of activities.
Yeah, that's a long and varied list, but really cool. And tell us a little bit about the piece that you are sharing for our Sonic Fields webpage, which is a piece called Lost, Lost, and draws on quite a rich world of references and concepts. You mentioned in the program notes for the piece the paraphrase mass. Um, there are texts based on the Hebrew Book of Lamentations. So tell us about all of this.
Sure. It's you. I think you brought up a good point about having many different things to talk about within the piece. Um, this was a large project of mine, and one I cared greatly about. And so there's many different ways I can talk about it. But sure, I can give like kind of an overview that might work pretty well. So this piece was commissioned by a group in Switzerland called Nota Bene, Chemichord Nota Bene. And they're actually a very good amateur choir that had programmed the Lamentations of Jeremiah by Thomas Tallis, a masterpiece of a cappella choral literature from the 1560s. And they asked if I could write a piece that could act as a complement to that on the program, or that might be inspired by that in some capacity. And this is something that I do a lot in my music. There are things that, even though I have different paths in my music, there are some things that link them. And one of them is this idea of using historical models, looking at some kind of piece or composer's output or a subgenre, and exploring that and then using that as the basis for my own creative work. What might be called, in a literal sense, an evocation, using something as a model and then an imaginative recreation. And um, so I decided to write a piece, Lost, that could interact with the Thomas Tallis's Lamentations of Jeremiah in such a way that there'd be a movement or section of the Lamentations. There are 5 of them, and I created 5 sections in my piece, Lost, and they are designed so that they can act like this: that Tallis, Rosenberg, etc. And that each of my sections will use the same themes, in fact, so that you can hear how those themes get morphed and reworked into my own musical language. And sometimes those relationships are overt and sometimes they're covert, but all of them are there. The Thomas Tallis's piece is the direct inspiration from everything that I wrote in there. But obviously, it doesn't sound like the 1560s in my piece. It's modern. It's my own musical language that feels relevant to me in my time, but it's very much indebted to and an homage to that background. The title itself, Lost, or L-O-S-T, L period O period S period T period, is comes from the text, which you mentioned a little bit, saying that it comes from the Bible. What it is the Lamentations of the Bible is also in 5 parts, which is why Tallis is in 5 parts. And each book of the Lamentations in 5 parts is an acrostic poem. It uses the Hebrew alphabet to go in each of the 22 lines of the Hebrew. So each one is in 22 lines, with the middle being actually 66. There's just 3 repetitions of an acrostic poem. But each one is an acrostic poem, and using the Hebrew alphabet. And what I did is I created my own text for the piece in English. And in keeping with the tradition of the Lamentations, I which by the way deals with the Lamentations in the Bible, deal in the Old Testament, um, deal with the sudden sacking of Jerusalem, the destruction of Jerusalem, and then the psychological ramifications of that sudden loss. And so I created my own text that is in 5 stages, each one based on a different stage of grief, as the 5 stages of grief, as hypothesized by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And so denial and depression, bargaining, etc. And and I created 22 lines in keeping with the Bible. But I wrote it in English, and English has 26 letters, and I wanted to write an acrostic poem, but have 22 lines. So I got rid of 4 letters, and those 4 letters are in alphabetical order, L, O, S, and T. And that's where the title comes from.
What was it like writing your own text for a choral work? Is that something that you had done before?
I have. In fact, this connects with New College, because at New College, my very first real composition, I might call it, the first piece that I really think is like my opus 1, happened in my second year, which was I did an ISP, an independent study project in January, where I wrote a piece. And that composition was called Carnival. And for that, I was inspired by Elliott Carter's metric modulation techniques, which I just learned in one of Steve Miles's classes. And I also learned about this idea of using just 2 different staff lines instead of the normal 5, where the top staff could be the highest note you can sing, and then the bottom, the lowest note you can sing, and everything else could be represented within that range, so that it could have this speech sung hybrid, not exactly like Sprechstimme, but something like a quality that is somewhere between the 2. And so I created some piece that used both of those as a technique, and then I created my own text that was based on this idea of the freak show and the carnival, characters, and it was visual and playful, and that was performed at an early New College event, one of the very first ones, called Speech Acts. And so from the very beginning, I was kind of creating my own text and my own lyrics for a lot of the music that I write. And I don't always do that, but for this project, I did actually spent a solid week looking at all kinds of different texts that I could use. And in the end, I wanted to do something so specific. I had this idea, well, I should do my own acrostic poem. And you're not gonna find an acrostic poem that has 20, all the different dimensions I was looking for. So I decided I'm just gonna create one. And so a lot of times that's the reason why I create something, is often because I want something very specific in mind. And I feel that I could either hire someone to do it, collaborate, which is a very good possibility, but often it's something I like doing myself, and I'll just create myself.
Yeah, and you mentioned too in your description of this piece that there's an element of it that is sort of your own language and a contemporary one, and one that you feel kind of speaks to the world as it is now. What are some elements of that? Just curious to hear about how you think about topics related to musical language.
Yeah, it's a really great question, and really hard to answer too. Yeah, this is one where I want to like open up the score and show you all these examples of things, but let's see. One important part of what I do might be called dynamic systems. I use something that I like to think of as dynamic systems. And dynamic systems, in my use of it, is a interplay between independence and collaboration. And we like to think of, when we think of large ensembles performing together, we generally think of a conductor in the front, and the conductor moves and determines everyone's rate of play and how fast, how loud and how soft. There's all these things that we all point towards one individual. But what if we could break down that hierarchy and have moments of independence and relating to each other, listening to each other, and challenging that power structure? And so um, this is represented in Lost, but a lot of my pieces where you can think of it as kind of like controlled improvisation, but I think of it almost as more of a political situation, a political restructuring, where you have lots of different factions that can be formed fighting for independence. Everything from anarchy, where everyone's doing their own thing, to complete dictatorship, where everyone is following strictly the role of the conductor, and everything between. And this sort of jostling for power, as well as like the power dynamics and all the metaphorical resonances that go with that, are represented in my piece. And I think about these types of things a lot. And I think those are represented, especially in movement 2 of Lost. If anyone like wants to listen to the piece, movement 2 does this in a large degree, where there's lots of different types of power dynamics and how those are being represented. And I call these all dynamic systems because they're constantly morphing and changing, and they change not only how one plays the music, but how one listens to the music and how one interacts in space and time. How strictly you follow the score or the metronome is often given flexibility.
That's fascinating. And the video that you've shared with us is also a score video, so we can follow along there. So I encourage everyone to listen and watch and enjoy this piece, Lost. So what is a project that you're looking forward to next? Like what's on your list for work coming up?
Well, one thing that's very exciting that relates to Lost is that there's going to be a CD release, an album release of this piece, and that's going to be coming out in just a month's time, performed by the extraordinary ensemble, professional vocal ensemble called San Diego Pro Art Voices, and led by Patrick Walders. And that's going to be an album I'm very excited to share with everyone. And they did such a fantastic job recording this quite difficult and demanding piece. And they are performing this interwoven version of the piece. The piece can exist on its own as just my own piece, which the link that I sent you with the score filing video just has my own piece. It does not have the Thomas Tallis in there. One of the things I did for this project was that I created my own critical edition of the Tallis, so that it was originally written for men only. I made a version for mixed choir, and one that really emphasizes the different melodic themes, which is what I ended up using in my own piece. And so I wanted to really bring those out and draw attention to them. So this album will have the ensemble performing the full intermixed version. So the whole piece, when combined, the Thomas Tallis is about 25 minutes and my piece is about 25 minutes. So the album is about 50 minutes long in that one interplayed version. And so if anyone is interested in checking that out, it will be on the San Diego Pro Art Voices website in a month's time or so. So in early January, in the beginning of 2021. After that, there's a number of great projects that I'm excited about. I'm creating a piece right now for a vocal ensemble called Element, 4 individual voices of professional singers. And this has been a crazy year. 2020 has, of course, been hard for so many of us. For myself, I've lost a lot of people in my family. Interestingly, none due to COVID, but I lost my aunt and an ex-girlfriend, and recently my father. And but we've all have lost a lot and have struggled in this year. And the piece that I'm working on, and interestingly, it sounds like I'm very depressed all the time writing. We talked about this piece called Lost, and now another piece that deals with loss. But I'm writing a setting of the Kaddish, the Jewish prayer for those that have succumbed, or those that have things that have been lost. And so that actually does connect with the project the piece that we're just talking about, as well as something I'm working on right now. And then next year I have this plan of writing a collection, another historical model, a collection on Bach's two-part inventions. There's 15 two-part inventions that Bach wrote, these beautiful two-voiced contrapuntal music, and they're some of my first inspirations in all of classical music when I was just a little kid, and I loved them then, and I still love them now. I remember I used to travel. My first international trip that I ever took, in fact, at least my first big solo international trip, I took a score. I took only one score, and it was the two-part inventions. And so I've been like literally carrying them on my back throughout the world. And um, because this time of COVID makes it very hard to do as many large ensemble pieces, because large ensembles are basically disbanded currently, or only doing it remotely. I thought it's the perfect time to do this lifelong goal of mine of writing some inventions of my own. So I'm going to try to write 15 two-part inventions, each one sort of connected to Bach's, but again, using my own language and my own approach, and having a number of pianists, collaborating with a number of pianists for performances and interpretations. So that's a big project that will take most of the next year. And then um, next fall, in about just a little under a year from now, I'll be writing a piece for the Brazilian National Orchestra based in Sao Paulo, for a performance that will be performed there, for a festival there. And so, yeah, there's a couple of exciting composition projects in the near future.
That sounds amazing. And sorry for all of your losses this year. Sorry to hear about that. And it sounds like music for you is in some ways integrated with coming to terms with that, or finding responses to that loss. Is that kind of a part of what's happening in this piece Lost, and then your upcoming work based on the Kaddish?
Exactly. Yeah, I think music has healing powers, in real ways. I mean, if we look at neuroscience evidence, there's plenty of things to find that music helps in all kinds of very meaningful, real, palpable ways. And certainly, music has that as a listener for me, but also as a creator. It's how do you reckon with hardship, and how do you come to terms with things? How do you respond to difficulties, and to heartbreak? And as an artist, one of the things, of course, that I can do is to channel those feelings, those things that seem beyond words, into a musical practice.
Yeah, well, it has a pretty direct relationship to the present moment for, I think, a lot of people. So it's very powerful to talk about that now. And I think I remember reading this in Marshall McLuhan, but I think he was quoting Ezra Pound, something like, artists have kind of antennae out into the environment. And sometimes the environment just comes and visits you directly. And sometimes, artists, I think, have a kind of a sense about what's happening out there that might be different than people who don't practice art, all the time and every day, might be experiencing. But yeah, those are great things to hear about, and we're so glad that you've been able to share this work with us. So And so where should people go to learn more about your work and what you're up to?
Um, well, if you go to my website, if anyone wants to go to my website, it's jasonrosenberg.org. And that's a great place to get started on hearing my music and also seeing my research. Anything that I do with, we haven't talked about this, but any my music cognition or perception research, um, there's PDFs of a lot of those just directly on that page. I also have a TED talk where I discuss Lost in a lot more depth. And if you just Googled my full name, Jason Carl Rosenberg, you'll find that right away. And that's a good place to start if anyone wants to know more about this piece and also have examples of how I take Talus's melodic material and put it into my own. Um, that's a good place as well. And I would
Awesome.
encourage if anyone is watching this and would like to be in contact with me or have further questions, I'm very reachable and love getting emails from people that have listened to my music and it spoke to them, or there's people that are maybe young composers looking for that have questions about life as a composer, as a freelance composer, as a composition professor, or about my own artistic practice. Just you can reach out to me. My email is available on my website, and there's lots of ways to contact me, either through the website or directly. And so I encourage you to do that.
Awesome. Jason, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon and for sharing your work on our site. And we wish you a great rest of your year.
Thank you, and it was wonderful to be here, and I'm happy to share what I do, and it's an honor.
Thanks.